In all my videos about eco activism, groups like Just Stop Oil, Extinction Rebellion, and so on, I've obviously focused on the UK because that's where those groups are active. But actually, this has been going on in continental Europe as well. And I've just read a report by Euronews. I'm going to read it out. If you bear with me, it's not too long. But I think it raises questions actually about the importance of democracy, actually. Um, Also about, in this case, how out of touch the UN can be. Um, Now, just a caveat before I get into this, I'm not one of those who say the UN should be abolished because I think if you take that position, you need to offer an alternative. And at the moment, there isn't really an alternative. There's a reason the UN exists. It may be toothless, it may be incompetent, but there is a reason it was set up, namely in the post-World War II global situation. Among many other reasons. I just can't see a viable alternative to the UN, but I do favour significant reform within, and I think it falls on liberal democracies to push for that. I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but the re-election of Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Turkey obviously raises questions on the global situation. That's maybe for another video. Anyway, I'm just going to read this out, so bear with me, because I think the UN is not for the first time really out of touch here. Like I said, it's from Euronews. The story is by Charlotte Elton. They need to be protected. UN speaks out after Germany raids homes of climate activists. Climate activists need to be protected against harsh crackdowns, the UN has warned, after German authorities raided the homes of several environmental campaigners. Police raided the homes of activists in 7 German states last week. 170 officers targeted Last Generation, an activist collective which has disrupted traffic in German cities, searching homes, shutting down the group's website, and freezing several bank accounts. Good stuff. Basically, they sound like the German equivalent of Just Stop Oil. Speaking to reporters in New York, a spokesman for UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres defended the role of climate activists. Climate activists led by the moral voice of young people with no actual qualifications. Got to mention that have continued to pursue their goals even in the darkest days. Spokesperson Stefan Dujarric told Newswire DPA, "They need to be protected and we need them now more than ever." Why are German police targeting Last Generation? Founded in 2021, Last Generation protests climate laws through civil disobedience. They conducted 276 road blockages in Germany last year, mostly gluing themselves to highways, so pretty much the same tactics as the British equivalent. The blockades are protests against the government's climate policy, which they insist protects business profits, breaks its own promises, and our democratic constitution. Last week's raids are linked to a series of charges police filed against the group in 2022. 7 suspects aged between 22 and 38 are accused of forming or supporting a criminal organisation. 2 of the group are suspected of planning to sabotage an oil pipeline running between Bavaria and Italy. The suspects are accused of collecting at least €1.4 million to finance these criminal activities. This money has been sourced through donations. The group is controversial in Germany, where conservative politicians have lined up to condemn them. Last Monday, Chancellor Olaf Scholz said that he thought it was completely crazy to somehow stick yourself to a painting or on the street. Some have speculated his comments were in part to blame for the raids. Responding to the raids, Last Generation tweeted, Volig Bekloppt, completely crazy. Please excuse my limited German pronunciation skills, referring to Schultz's comment. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has been outspoken in the support of climate activists. Well, maybe Mr. Guterres needs to get on the ground and see how they're affecting ordinary people. In March, he named 7 young climate leaders to be his youth advisory group on climate change. At the announcement, Guterres urged young climate advocates around the world to continue raising their voices and said that the unrelenting conviction of young people is essential to keeping climate goals within reach. Dujarric, Guterres' spokesperson, made the comments about the German raids to reporters in New York. He did note that governments have a responsibility to enforce laws and ensure security. However, he reminded journalists that protesters have forced action on climate change. debatable. Campaigners have been instrumental at crucial moments in pushing governments and business leaders to do much more, he insisted. It's clear a lot of the progress we've seen on awareness on climate change and positive movement on climate change is due to the fact that people have been demonstrating peacefully throughout the world, he said. In other parts of Europe, the Last Generation group have targeted cultural assets. Last week, Last Generation activists poured charcoal into Rome's Trevi fountain, demand an immediate end to public subsidies for fossil fuels. Nothing like vandalizing a national monument, world-renowned icon, to get your point. Um, right, there's a lot to break down with this. I think that Guterres and the spokesman are massively out of touch with ordinary people. Here's the thing that's frustrating. Some of the basic arguments they're making are not wrong. Of course, it's good that young people can have a voice. Of course, it's good that young people are concerned. I've never said that that is a problem. But I think the onus is on adults to also be responsible and honest about certainly what works and what doesn't. Now, this claim that activists have been instrumental in pushing policy change, that certainly hasn't been the case when we look at the UK. There is zero evidence that activists taking these extreme measures, gluing themselves to roads, directly targeting the public has had any influence on government policy. In fact, the only policy that can be proven to have had a link to is the introduction of the Public Order Bill. I think many people in Britain will be looking to Germany and saying we should follow tactics. Why are we so soft? They will be saying, well done, Germany. I am. And one of the arrests or one of the motivations for the arrest was the targeting of an oil pipeline. Now, that would definitely cross into the realm of terrorism. Some of these actions directly can endanger life, their own lives for sure, but also potentially the lives of others. So I really think that the narrative of peaceful protests needs to be challenged. I've said this before and I'll say it again. Just because they aren't throwing punches or planting bombs doesn't make them peaceful. I think the thing that is most obnoxious and most troubling about these groups is their deliberate targeting of the public. That's what sets them apart from other protesters. With other protesters, you would have a situation where they have a grievance against the government or, a particular foreign government maybe, and they would protest outside an embassy or maybe against the government in question. They would protest outside the corridors of power, whether it be outside Downing Street or outside the Bundestag. But in this case, they're targeting ordinary German citizens, ordinary British citizens, ordinary French citizens, ordinary Italian citizens. I don't know if there's American equivalents. I haven't really heard of. It probably is, but most of them seem to be active in Europe. It's interesting. I mean, you get environmental campaigners all over the world, and certainly in countries that are heavily impacted by the effects of climate change, countries like the Philippines, Bangladesh, India. I'm sure there's a lot of activism going on. Curious that it is in Europe where most of this direct action sort of tactics is taking place. Now, Europe, of course, is not immune to um, climate disasters. 2 years ago, the year that the Last Generation was founded, incidentally, that was the same year Just Stop Oil was founded, 2021. Germany, of course, suffered devastating flooding, and we've seen it in recent weeks in Italy. 17 people died. In Germany, it was almost 200. So I don't think this is a case that German citizens haven't experienced, extreme weather. They have. So why then is there not, this mass rush of German citizens rushing to join Last Generation? I think it's because they see them as a fundamentally undemocratic force. Um, a lot of them are very young, suggests impressionability. Um, young people are very idealistic. They're not always very practical. Sometimes they are. I don't want to be patronizing. I mean, I'm only 37. I'm not an old man. I'm a millennial. But I think many people will look at this and say this is the sheer arrogance of the UN. I mean, this is the same organization that put Eritrea, which is one of the world's worst dictatorships, onto a human rights body. And what we have here is a liberal democratic country, Germany, with a reasonably good human rights record, certainly in its post-unification period, basically enacting the law, upholding the law, and enforcing the law against extremists, people who think that they have a right to hurt the public, people who think that they have a right to hold the public hostage, to sabotage infrastructure. Um, that's absolutely the right thing to do. It's a responsible thing to do. What wouldn't be responsible is if the German government just sat by and done nothing. In fact, I commend them for taking robust measures, and it is infuriating that this country seems so crippled by them. I mean, the government's trying, but it's not straightforward to get these things passed. And it is right that legislation is scrutinised. I'm not saying it should be rushed through, but it is a disgrace that climate activists, so called, um, can hold the public hostage. And in Britain, even police moving them on, you get these cries of, "Oh, the right to peaceful protest is being taken away." We haven't even gone anywhere near as far as Germany in terms of, arresting them in their homes. But, freezing bank accounts, that sort of thing sounds like a very good idea. I read another report today that Adam McKay, the Hollywood director, typical hypocrite, he's one of the funders of the global, I believe it's called the Global Climate Fund. That's one of their major donors. They're getting millions from that. That's why these people are so well organized in terms of, they manage to keep doing this over and over and over again, despite the arrests. I think we need to, close bank accounts. I'm not sure what the legal requirements would be on that. Maybe it's different in Germany. Maybe the German government has more flexibility on that. Maybe it's a state issue. Germany, of course, is a federal system. Maybe some of those states have their own laws in which they're able to do that. But I've long felt that the financial aspect is a big factor because, arrests are all very well, but they want to be arrested. They literally want to be arrested. At the Glasgow Climate Summit in 2021, they were actually disappointed there were not mass arrests because in their perverse thinking, they wanted to embarrass the British government, by having the world's cameras sort of see them mass arrested and to show how evil the British government is. But that didn't happen. They had their voice. You had Greta Thunberg coming out with her usual um, diatribes. She has no answers. Um, and what I think is really galling for a lot of people that would read a report like this would be to say it's all very well for Guterres and his deputy or a spokesman to be lecturing Berlin or London or Paris or Rome when, they're not looking at the situation on the ground. What about the human rights of ordinary Germans trying to live their lives? What about their human rights? Democracy, by definition, is the will of the majority. Democracy is not ignoring the majority. And the vast majority of ordinary citizens are wholly fed up with these eco-extremists. They really, really are. Um, so I suspect many German citizens will welcome this. It's just common sense. I mean, if you have people threatening to, sabotage an industrial system of a country, they are basically terrorists by any reasonable definition. So what I see with this is the German state acting against domestic terrorism. In fact, it can cross into international terrorism when it's a pipeline connecting to Italy. And I've long been concerned that they will escalate. At the moment they're vandalizing paintings and disrupting the public. Um, but I think it's only a matter of time before they start in Britain, really thinking about blowing up oil refineries or who knows? Who knows? But I think they're dangerous. Um, and I just wish that we were far more robust against them. This is not peaceful protest. This is holding the public hostage. This is deliberately seeking to hurt the public. That is not peaceful protest. Peaceful protest would be holding placards, maybe loudspeakers, joining in a march or a rally in a town square, a city square, maybe outside an embassy, but deliberately targeting the public, deliberately. I'm not talking about a side effect, I'm talking about deliberately targeting the public. That, to my mind, is not peaceful protest. That is militant action. So I 100% support the German government in doing this, and I hope they ignore the UN and point out the hypocrisy of this. And I would just like to see Britain taking similarly robust measures. Freeze their bank accounts. The arrests are all very well, but they want to be arrested because they see themselves as martyrs. Freeze their bank accounts, and then it's harder for them to sort of say that they're being persecuted, because being arrested and being put in prison is a sort of visceral sight. But freeze their bank accounts, it's actually quite practical.